Good day and welcome to the Valley Regional Forum, where substantive issues that influence the San Fernando Valley are discussed. Today we'll be talking with West Hollywood Councilman John Duran, who is running for the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors seat, District 3. I'm Tony Michelman.
And I'm Sean McCarthy. And we're going to have a free-flowing discussion here today with John. It's our intention, unlike some of the other forums we've done where they've been in a debate format, we're going to have a wide-ranging discussion on a number of topics that are important to not just voters in the County of Los Angeles, but specifically to voters in the San Fernando Valley. Tony, why don't you take it away?
Councilman Duran, question number one.
Okay.
The Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors is the executive and legislative head of the most complex county government in the United States. That means complex budgets, successes and failures. On the negative side, the board, in concert with county sanitation districts, approved and constructed a $430 million railway system to haul garbage to a desert landfill. Now the board has determined that the railway system is too expensive to operate. Instead, LA County will pay Orange County an additional $15 million a year to accept our trash into their landfills, $430 million plus additional costs. How could something like this happen, and how would you avoid fiascos like this if you're elected?
What a terrible waste of resources. Let me start by saying my city is 30 years old. I've been on the council for 15 years, so for half of my city's life I've been there. My city has $100 million in reserves that we've set aside. The entire county has $200 million. So my little small town has half of what the entire county of Los Angeles has. And that's because we've been very prudent and very responsible in our fiscal management. A mistake of that magnitude is unforgivable. It means that nobody's watching the taxpayer dollars. And that's what's really critical. It's not my money. You know, the money that I have, the tax money I have, is not mine. I'm a trustee over those funds. And it should be handled as if you're entrusted with that money for the public's sake. This mistake that you're describing, I don't understand how it's even possible to do that. I mean, I have a $100 million budget that I am responsible for on an annual basis. If I stopped taking in tax money right now, I could run my city for 18 months because we have that much set aside in prudent reserves. But rarely do we have any sort of waste or mismanagement of this magnitude. I think part of the problem is LA County is the largest bureaucracy in the world. Bureaucracies are designed to misfunction. I'm going to quote George Washington for a second. George Washington said that government is like fire. You need a little bit of it to cook and stay warm. You have too much of it, the whole house goes up in flames. And I think that is what we have seen a lot of, is that when government gets too big and too large and too cumbersome, and existing programs just get refunded every year without any questioning as to why they exist, we end up with errors along this magnitude. So I really think that government should be lean and mean, and that's one of the things that we've done in my city. And people say, well, are you ready to go from a town of 37,000 to a county of 10 million? Well, it's a philosophical issue, just adding a few more zeros, right? When my city started, we had an annual budget of about 10 million. Well, now we're at 100 million, so we've gone up tenfold. And we've done it in a very responsible way. I have a AAA bond rating that's higher than the United States of America. You don't end up with a bond rating like that or 100 million in reserve if you're making fiasco mistakes like the one you just described. So I think it's really important that, in the future, looking at the way in which county government is, it's true that I would sit as both executive and legislator and even quasi-judicial on some appeals. But at the end of the day, one person has to be responsible. And local government, I think, is best served when there's a CEO at the top. The 5 elected sit there as a governing body. You would cast votes 3-2 or 4-1 or 5-0. And then you charge the executive with implementing or executing the policy. And if he or she fails to do that, you fire them. So something like that sounds like an unforgivable mistake to be made. So who's responsible? And I think part of the blame is probably the fact that the 5 supervisors have acted like kings and queens of their fiefdoms, giving direction to department heads, not relying or deferring to the chief executive. And what ends up happening are mistakes like the one you've described. So I think I have a very different philosophy than perhaps the supervisors that are there. They've all been there 20 years. They're all good people. But I come from a history and a record of being very effective with the notion that smaller government is beautiful. A pothole in my city, its average lifespan is 6 hours. 6 hours. We repair potholes same day. If it goes to the day after, we feel like we've failed. And I think if the county was to operate that way, if the city of Los Angeles was to operate that way, our people would be so much happier.
A big if.
Yeah.
You know, one of the big issues that's out there right now, and certainly as a business organization, our primary concern is making sure that we prosper, that we're able to provide the jobs that people are looking for, that we are able to pay the taxes that make everything run, and that we make this an enjoyable place to be. But recently in the news, we know that Occidental Petroleum, one of the companies in the district that you want to represent, as well as Toyota, have decided to leave the state of California for a variety of different reasons. But I'm wondering, do you think it's because of the taxes and incentives that Texas, that is the lower taxes, and the incentives that Texas has offered to these companies to move there? Is it because of the high taxes and the overregulation, as many of us in the business community believe it is, or is it something else that's missing, that we're allowing major organizations, major corporations, organizations that county and city government should have been in touch with on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis, to find out how they're doing, then surprised they leave the state? Can you tell us what you know about this, how you feel about it?
Sure. First of all, government doesn't create wealth. Government taxes wealth. It relies on other people creating wealth in order to survive. So the whole notion about government being the primary source of income or wealth, it's upside down. Government does best when it stays out of the way of private sector businesses and corporations, organizations, and actually governs least. My city, when we first got started, we didn't have much of a local economy. We were predicted to fail. We seceded from the county of Los Angeles. We were told we were never going to make it. We didn't have an economic base, and that the county was going to have to take us back over. Well, the consequences of succession have been no potholes, $100 million in reserves, and a AAA bond rating, because we stayed out of the way of our local businesses community. We've always been supportive. The Sunset Strip, our Main Street, Santa Monica Boulevard, Melrose Avenue, and Beverly are our four main thoroughfares. And we've created business districts in each of those places so that City Hall and government are working hand in hand with businesses and small business owners too. We have a lot of large businesses in my city, but small businesses are really the bread and butter and the backbone of our local economy. So we got to make sure that we're serving. The way we get in the way, double permitting, delays on permits, red tape that strangles people's innovation and creativity, calls that aren't returned, not being responsive. If we were to do any of those things, we would strangle a young entrepreneur. You know, many young entrepreneurs walk in underfunded, big dreams, completely undercapitalized. Completely undercapitalized, right?
That's true.
That's what entrepreneurs do. And so government should know that in advance and assist them by getting out of the way and letting them create and innovate. You know, not all new businesses are going to make it, but that innovation and creativity is what sparks local economies. So I think from a philosophical issue, yes, taxes can hamper or hinder, and I think overregulation really cuts into a business's livelihood. But I think the bigger question for Los Angeles is, where are we going? Are we going to go the way of Detroit or San Bernardino or Stockton into bankruptcy? Or are we going to become some new urban center? I mean, we have all the resources here. We have 10 million people. That's incredible density in terms of markets. We have ready, willing markets available to us. We have cultures and ethnicities and languages and religions from all over the world. We're a modern day Constantinople where all roads cross, especially along the Pacific Rim. This is an advantage. This is an advantage. This is stuff we should be using to empower ourselves, our local economy, and our local businesses. But instead, I feel like Los Angeles County is adrift. It's like this big lumbering bureaucracy, largest in the world, $26 billion, 100,000 employees with no sense of direction. And it's really constraining and strangling business.
So what is the answer? We've lost, as I say, Toyota. We've lost recently Occidental. I work in the outplacement business. We're watching companies lay people off all over. There are young people coming out of college today, no jobs. Is it government not paying attention? Is it are we not preparing people? What really is the problem? And why are we seeing so much business literally flee the state?
I think we have to remember that we're a competitor in competitive markets. We are competing against Texas. We are competing against Louisiana and New York in film production. We're competing against Canada, right? We're in competition for capital and resources. A lot of capital flowing into our country now is from India, Brazil, China. You know, we're in a free market system, like most of the democracies in the West are. And if we realize that, then we got to realize we got to compete. The problem with the current system, as I see it, is that we've not been willing to move a lot of the assumptions about our local economy and our county economy beyond what we've always been. We were founded maybe on the notion of entertainment. You look back at the history of LA, and I'm a native. I was born here, I was raised here, I've been here my whole life. You know, Hollywood and the entertainment industries, whether it's been filmmaking, television, music making, it is one of the core, businesses that makes Los Angeles, Los Angeles. It's what we're identified with. The whole world has changed and innovated, and we failed to adapt. Studios used to be places where capital and labor gathered to produce entertainment. Today, the work's done on a laptop. Current production, post-production, everything's done on a computer out of people sitting at a bay in their living room, possibly. And so the world has changed in the way, and we've not. We're still operating under old assumptions. Community colleges should be teaching young people about the skills that are going to be needed to work in this telecommunications, post World War II world that we find ourselves in, where anybody can do anything with a computer in front of you. And we haven't really trained our workers to do that. So we're relying, I think, too much on our past and not thinking about the future of Los Angeles. And in the midst of all that, the part that I would have some control over is this thing called the county, which is this huge governing body that I think is too far removed from markets and individuals around the county. I think it's always best to empower people at the local level. Take the county's resources, push it down to the cities, to the chambers of commerce, to the neighborhood council groups, to nonprofit organizations in this community. Give them the tax dollars and then let them use that to create, to innovate, to move ourselves forward. And looking at not only the industries you've identified, aerospace has completely abandoned us. Light and medium manufacturing has completely left the county of Los Angeles. Now we're being under threat in our basic industries, movie making, television, and music. And we've done nothing to change, just thinking we're going to be okay, we're going to weather this.
Well, things are changing, as you say, and changing all the time. Even the way that we get oil out of the earth is changing, and I'm talking about fracking, which is a very controversial subject. In fact, the city of Los Angeles recently voted in favor of a hydraulic fracking moratorium. Now, opponents of the moratorium say that fracking is a viable way to produce new jobs, and there are currently about 30,000 jobs in Los Angeles that are related directly to fracking. Additionally, the oil reserves under California, if extracted, would eventually drive down prices, some say, at the pump and foster energy independence. And supporters of the moratorium say that fracking is environmentally dangerous and that a larger investment in renewable energy technologies, for instance, would be a better way to go. Where do you stand on fracking?
Let me start by saying I'm the only business owner on my city council, and I'm the only business owner in this race. So I'm very sensitive to the issues of chambers and businesses and what it takes for people to succeed. But on the issue of fracking, I still don't think we have enough information on how to do it in a place where we have tectonic plates under our feet. And I'm mostly concerned about some of the long-term consequences that we don't even understand yet, and the fact that we live in earthquake country. So I think there's a public safety issue first, before we even get to the environmental issues that may be involved when people talk about the different byproducts that are produced by fracking, how they pollute the water table, how they possibly poison the soils, which is what I hear about. I want to know what's going to happen to the faults, under the Hollywood Hills, the Inglewood, Newport fault. I want to know what's going to happen to fault lines. And I don't think we have enough information yet to start experimenting with it. So it's one of those issues that I think should be studied carefully before we move forward. I don't support fracking at this time because I don't have any satisfactory answers to my questions about the fact that we live along earthquake faults and what impact, if any, does the fracking process have on seismic activity.
And renewable technologies, how do you feel about subsidizing renewable technologies moving forward on that front?
In general, I favor them. The problem is the cost. A lot of renewable energies come with a price tag. And we have to remember at the same time that all these great environmental issues that people have and ideas that they have come with a price tag. And a lot of working class families just can't afford the price tag. We have men and women, mom and dad are both working just to keep a roof over their heads. And the thought of having an electric bill triple or quadruple because we're trying to move too quickly to wind and solar energy without any government investment in those subsidies, I think we're moving too quickly. So I know at some point, sure, I'd like to get to the place where we have renewable energies available for everybody. But at the same time, we have to be conscious of the cost to the consumer.
John, a big question here in LA County and in the city of Los Angeles is going to be the 1/2 cent tax. The question is, will county voters vote for the 1/2 cent extension of the 30-year Measure R tax for rail and other transportation systems, or the LA City tax to repair streets and sidewalks, or both? A year ago, the County of Los Angeles considered putting Measure R on the MTA, and the County of Los Angeles considered putting Measure R, the extension, on the ballot and decided not to do it. Now it's on the ballot, and we want to know how you feel about whether LA County voters, especially here in the San Fernando Valley, should anticipate paying another 30 years of transportation tax, and in the short term paying an additional 1/2 cent sales tax to repair streets and sidewalks, and how do we deal with this particular issue?
Those two tax proposals back to back are likely to doom both. And it's unfortunately a shame that the city of Los Angeles is unable to keep up basic street maintenance and repair. I mean, that is the shame. You know, I do support the county tax on major transit systems. I want to set that aside for a second. City of Los Angeles is bleeding red ink. They cannot get a balanced budget through. And a lot of it is because of the historical benefits and pensions that they've given to a lot of their workers. And unfortunately now, they're underfunded. And those pensions are starting to really strangle the city of Los Angeles, that they have to go for additional funding now just to do their basic responsibility of street repair. As I stated earlier, a pothole in my city lives about 6 hours. And I know there are many streets around the city of Los Angeles that are in bad need of repair, all throughout the city. So the city of Los Angeles has done a really bad job, The county, I think that before people are willing to vote for a tax on major transit systems, they have to have some assurance it's going to be used wisely. I think that people in the San Fernando Valley especially are concerned they're going to get left out. That, you know, by approving this tax, maybe you'll get transit systems along Wilshire Boulevard and Santa Monica Boulevard and other denser parts of the city, but what about the valley? Will the valley get its fair share? The valley in many ways is more suited perfectly for transit systems because it's got a natural grid that exists in terms of the development of the San Fernando Valley with north-south and east-west highways. It's got a grid, not a natural grid, but a man-made grid in place that would really suit itself to mass transit. But I think that we have to think outside of the box again. What it comes down to is financing. Speaker Boehner is only going to give federal dollars where the House GOP believes they have enough ridership to justify that expenditure. That means denser parts of the city. A measure like Measure R is only going to get approved by a majority of the voters if they think they're going to get their fair share, including in outlying areas of the San Fernando and San Gabriel valleys. So we have two different thoughts. What's missing in this discussion are public-private partnerships. You know, what really has to happen is the government has to partner with private sector capital in order to develop the systems that we want, and instead of a 50-year course, do it in a 10 or a 20. And a great place to experiment with that would be the San Fernando Valley, because you've already got those grids set out north, south, east, west. You could develop a system that would just serve the San Fernando Valley before you had to start talking about connectors through the Cahuenga Pass or the Sepulveda Pass into other parts of Los Angeles, whether you're tunneling or cutting through Cahuenga. Problem with the tunnel along Sepulveda that would connect the valley to the LAX area is if you built it, you'd eat up every transit dollar that exists. All your transit money would go into that one project. So it's not possible unless you start thinking about public-private partnership. I look at Orange County. There's a county in bankruptcy. They developed toll road systems. They're out of bankruptcy. And now their toll roads are working well. And it looks like they're going to possibly expand them. So we need to start thinking about toll roads, tolling systems, public-private partnerships as a way to encourage more usage of mass transit in Los Angeles. And start thinking about, in my mind, decoupling the valley for a moment, where I think you can more quickly develop a system to serve people here rather than some of the denser parts on the other side.
And we've done that with the Orange Line. The Metrolink is a marvelous system. The Burbank Airport is putting in an intermodal transportation hub right at the airport. They plan, with some of this Measure R money, I'm assuming, to build a new station at the north end of the airport, right along Hollywood Way. But the West San Fernando Valley, and this is one of the Measure R issues that probably should come up, and maybe it is one of those private-public partnerships that you're talking about. Between Topanga Canyon and Sepulveda, There's no way to get over the Santa Monica Mountains. There's not one road, not one alley, not one trail that isn't blocked in one way or another. I guess you could ride a bike over, or you could walk over the mountains. But for 9 miles, there's not a single way for people who live in the West San Fernando Valley to get to West LA. This, I believe, if you look at the number of people going over the hill, if you talk to the people who transit the freeway every day, they're being robbed of an hour to an hour and a half every single day of their time, because there is no other alternative over the mountains. Is it time for a tunnel under the Santa Monica Mountains into Santa Monica? Isn't something like that in the offing for us? Can't we do something more than what we're doing right now?
Yes, and we should. And the question then is how to pay for it. And I think it's the development of toll roads and toll systems for the people that want to spend that other hour and a half maybe at home with their kids, have the ability to pay for that. And we looking at the 133, which is over near Irvine, where they actually built a toll road that connected Laguna Beach up into the foothills of Orange County. Is a great example of a toll road system that works. And it's cut out a lot of commute time for people and preserved a lot of quality of life issues. I think the challenge with all these issues we're going to talk about with mass transit is parking.
The most solemn responsibility of the Board of Supervisors is to protect the most vulnerable people in our society, children. A recent report deeply criticizes the Department of Children and Family Services, attributing many deaths to a stifling bureaucracy and incompetent employees. Just prior to this report, a new director, Philip Browning, was brought into the department. Do you think Mr. Browning is on the right track to repair this tragic situation, or do we need to do more?
I don't think that Mr. Browning or anybody could make it work with the current system. I think the entire system has to be blown up. There are too many departments involved with too many different functions and too many different funding streams that the bureaucracy has become so entangled in itself that we're not able to take care of the foster children. The social workers are not bad people. People who are drawn to social work go there because they want to be of service. So it's not that they're bad people, they just have a bad system. You know, the current ratio is 40 kids to 1 social worker. It should be 15. So the county's recent response to that was, well, let's just hire 1,000 more social workers. Great, except now you've added 1,000 more benefit packages and pensions. Again, it's the wrong direction. Some of that should have been contracted out with the nonprofit private sector, who also has social workers available to help put them to work in communities. Another big problem is the way in which the system is set up. The more veteran social workers end up usually in the desk jobs, and the new hires end up in the community. It should be the reverse. And the reason is, the more veteran social workers, they don't want to go to some of these neighborhoods. They have gangs, they have crime, they have poverty, they have drugs, and everyone's getting paid the same amount. So why would some of the more veteran social workers want to deal with that when they can sit behind the desk? There's no incentive. So during the next course of labor negotiations with those labor unions, there have to be financial incentives afforded to those social workers with a little more time to make them want to go do that work. We have to work with organized labor there. But we can also at the same time contract with nonprofit social workers to help relieve this ratio of number of children to social worker. The idea of a czar has been floated around, and it sounds really great, but I think it's a bad idea. I think that the other people in this race, they all think a czar should be appointed. But unless this czar person has some authority, again, you're setting him or her up to lose. When I think of a czar, I'm thinking they have a great deal of vertical mobility and horizontal mobility to cut through the bureaucracy. But nobody's going to give up the department heads, nobody's going to give up their different silos, nobody's going to give up the funding streams, and the 5 supervisors aren't going to give away power.
I agree with you on that, and I think the real systemic problem is that on the contact level where these tragedies are happening, we have inexperienced people, as you've said, and of all the county departments, you need experienced people in these potentially explosive situations.
Yes.
Kids are dying, and we don't have any real way of dealing with it. And a blue ribbon panel, as you say, is not going to fix it.
Right.
We've got to make these interactions effective.
Yes, I agree.
The issue of medical marijuana is a hot topic here in the San Fernando Valley, especially given the fact that the County of Los Angeles, oddly enough, has regulated so closely medical marijuana that there are virtually no medical marijuana facilities in the County of Los Angeles. what's happened as a result of that is that there have been an explosion of medical marijuana facilities in the West San Fernando Valley, in particular here in the Woodland Hills area. How do you see the county interacting with this? How do you see the county helping us to resolve this? And is it really a state issue, and should we wait for the state to make a decision on this?
I can tell you in the 5 months we've been campaigning, this is the first time we've had a question on medical marijuana. And I've been waiting for it because I figured at some point this was going to come up because I actually have a great deal of history on this issue. In my day job, I'm an attorney, and I've had some very controversial clients over the years. One of my very controversial clients was the very first medical marijuana facility in the early 1990s, a long time ago, long before Proposition 215. And what we found out was that medical marijuana to people with glaucoma, cancer, AIDS actually does have medicinal value to it. It helps relieve people of nausea. It helps them keep their medications down. It helps them put on weight if weight management is an issue, especially for people with cancer or AIDS. So it actually is effective. The problem was it's illegal under federal law. It's a Schedule I drug. And so according to the federal government, it has absolutely no value whatsoever. Still the case today. So I ended up representing the first center. It was called the Los Angeles Cannabis Resource Center. I was their lawyer, and they said, we want to try to do this. I said, we are breaking the law. Okay, not a problem, because I also represented the first needle exchange. I also have represented First Amendment protesters. So I'm okay with people breaking the law if there's a good reason to it. We went under medical necessity. So I will be your lawyer on one condition. You let me go in and meet with the Los Angeles County Sheriffs and the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office and get their input into what they would need to have satisfied to sign off on this program. And they agreed, and I went in with the DA and the sheriff, and we sat down. They wanted to come in anytime, day or night, with or without a search warrant. Check. They wanted photo identifications on every member of the center. Check. They wanted an updated doctor's note every 3 months to make sure that this patient actually needed marijuana. Check. Everything law enforcement asked for, we gave them. And they signed off on it. There was one in all of Los Angeles. And that was the case until September of 2001. September the 11th, 2001. We all know what happened that day, right? That day, big change in America's history with what happened in New York City. That same month, the U.S. Attorney's General's Office raided the one club we had that had over 1,000 patients in one place that were highly regulated by local law enforcement, the district attorney, and the county. We had one facility. Government came in, they shut it down, exploded it. So away went the supply, but the demand was still there. Out of that, 800 new facilities opened up within 3 years. There had been one, but again, government overreach and interference and something that was handled on the local level got exploded, and we ended up with this major crisis. In my town, we passed an ordinance, 5. That's all we want, same number we have today. Los Angeles was asleep at the switch, didn't do anything for years, and they came up with hundreds that are now unregulated. Now we're at a point where there's too many, and the city attorney is trying to cut them back. It's a lot harder to take something away from somebody once they already have it. Ultimately, it's a land use issue, and land use issues are usually managed by cities historically. There are adult establishments that are just not appropriate next to a playground, for example. Medical marijuana is the same sort of an issue, the way it's currently constituted, because I think anybody would be foolish to think that everybody going into a medical marijuana club is a qualified patient. That is not the case. That is not the case. It is not happening, right? So it is what it is, but at the same time, there's just too many, and they do affect too many neighborhoods. So in order to pull them back, the county, could have some regulation in this area if they decide to regulate it as a public health issue. That would be a way to work with the cities to say, cities can sign off on land use. County has to issue a health permit.
Thank you.
2012, the Board of Supervisors created a citizens committee to investigate reports of jail violence and other abuses by the Sheriff's Department. The commission determined that these abuses were widespread in the department, but since that time there have been additional indictments against former deputies for corruption and civil rights violations and other crimes. Recently, Sheriff Lee Baca resigned. Many of these issues have been attributed directly to Sheriff Baca, but was it mostly his fault? He was there a long time. Did he foster that environment, or is there a structural problem with the Sheriff's Department?
There's a systemic problem with the Sheriff's Department. I've been an attorney for 25 years. Much of that 25 years I've been in the criminal justice system. So I've been working pretty much weekly with jails, probation, and sheriffs. I want to start by saying that 99% of the sheriff deputies are outstanding men and women. My city, we contract with the sheriffs, and I will defend my deputies to the T. They're outstanding men and women. They care about their communities. The way the system is set up, though, it really doesn't help with what we're trying to do in big picture. When a sheriff deputy goes through the academy, as he or she is going through the academy, their first assignment is the jails. The jails are handling very serious felons, very serious problems. The jails are run like a military unit because they have to be. They have to have discipline, law, order in the jails in order to manage hundreds of inmates on a daily basis. After they serve in the jails, then they're sent out into the community. So what they learn in their first few months of training is how to operate in a military-like style with people. The two functions should be segregated. Those sheriff deputies that want to serve in the jails should stay in the jails. Those sheriff deputies that want to serve out in the communities under traditional community-based policing models should serve out in the communities. They should not be a stop along the way. And then I think you're able to develop better community police relations out here in the neighborhoods, and those deputies that want to serve in the jail stay in that system, much like the prison guards. The current LA County Jail is non-functional. The toilets don't work, the bathrooms don't work, people are stacked 6 to a room. You can't even supervise all of the inmates in the county jail without physically walking the halls because of the way it's designed. So big picture, at some point, the jail has to be demolished and a new state-of-the-art facility built. But in the meantime, we have this problem with the governor transferring all of our realignment prisoners down from state prisons into the county jails, forcing out a lot of the county jail inmates out into the streets early. The current early release system is 10%, meaning if somebody who gets convicted and has to do a county jail sentence does 10% of his or her time. The most you can do in the county jail is 1 year, so the most penalty we can give somebody is 1 month. That is not a deterrent for public safety. It's really hard to deter crime if you say, if you're not good, we're going to max you out in the county jail. It's 1 month.
As we move forward in this current year, there are going to be some changes coming to the Santa Monica Mountains. Recently, there was an announcement of a plan to potentially restrict development in the Santa Monica Mountains, especially in the Malibu area. For new homes and whatnot that are there. I think this has left a lot of property owners, people who were thinking of developing their property in the lurch. Can you tell us how you feel about this?
At the end of the day, I think it's about balance. I think one extreme or the other is never good. And I'm kind of one of these centrist people politically. I've been a member of both major political parties at one time in my life or another. At the end of the day, I think I'm mostly satisfied just in the center with people from both parties and the declines of states, just practical problem-solving answers. I think that to completely restrict the Santa Monica Mountains is overreach. I think that it's necessary to preserve a lot of the natural beauty of the Santa Monica Mountains, but we also have to be conscious of private property rights. They are protected in the Constitution of the United States and in the Constitution of the State of California. Property rights are protected. And so we have to be sensitive to that fact that these are property owners. Unless the government wants to take it and pay a reasonable price for it and to own it. Otherwise, the other side of this too is the public access to the Santa Monica Mountains. It's great to have these beautiful beaches and beautiful mountains and beautiful hiking areas, but if the public can't access them because we've completely said no to horse trails, hiking trails, bicycle use, well then nobody's enjoying these beautiful natural resources. So again, I think it has to be a balancing issue, case by case basis. If there's environmental sensitivity about a particular property, talk with the property owner, maybe there's some compromise that can be achieved. Some limited development in exchange for a sale of another portion of the property back to the county. So if the county wants to acquire more natural land to protect it, great. But do it from a congenial, cooperative place rather than adversarial. I think that's what's been the problem up there historically now. It's been this adversarial relationship that's just left a lot of people embittered. And at the end of the day, now, as I understand it, private property owners are being told they can't produce vineyards up there, they can't grow grapes, they can't grow produce up on their own property. That's overreach in my mind. So again, a balancing act, I think, is what's necessary.
Wonderful. Well, we're just about at the end of the time that we have for you. We'd like you to take a couple of minutes just to tell us a little bit more about your campaign, a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
Anything that you'd like our viewers to know about you. So please proceed.
All right. So I've had 14 years of experience in local government. This is a local government seat. Neither Zev Yaroslavsky or Ed Edelman ever served a day in Sacramento. They were local government guys who went up from local government to local government. And I think that it's important that whoever takes the spot be somebody who understands how local government is different than Sacramento or Washington. Sacramento and Washington are places where Democrats and Republicans have elections, fight wars, end up in bitter partisanship, and get nothing done. I have no interest in any of that. I like local government because it's nonpartisan. I don't really care if you're a Democrat or a Republican, a declined state. What are your ideas? And let's figure out a solution. That's what's attractive to me about local government. And that's why I want to continue to do it. I've come from a small town of 37,000, and now I'm being asked, can you go to 10 million? I think the answer is yes, because ultimately it's the philosophy of the elected official that's important. Add a few zeros, and it's the same sort of decision making. I have $100 million in reserves in a small town. The entire county has $200 million. There's no reason for that. It just means, in my mind, there hasn't been a careful balancing of priorities and setting money aside for a rainy day so that when major capital improvements are needed or we run into shortfalls, we have the ability to cushion the economic cycles that come and go. That's not any particular party's point of view. I think that both parties have good ideas. But at the end of the day, who is going to solve the problems for the county of Los Angeles? We have 5 supervisors. They're good women and men. I know them. They're good people. They've all been there 20 years, as have been their chiefs of staff and deputies and department heads. And we've been left with this lumbering, ineffective county government system. It needs refreshing. It needs revamping. It needs innovation. It means being willing to say no to labor when labor tries to overreach. It means being willing to say no to your friends. I have a AAA bond rating in my city. The county has a double. The county should have a triple. I have a higher bond rating than the United States of America. Why? Because we always planned for growth. We always planned in our city visioning for growth. But what we didn't do is anytime we had received additional revenues, we didn't just create new government programs to spend that money. We banked it. We banked it. We banked it. So we have $100 million, and through the Great Recession of 2008, we didn't lay off one employee, we didn't cut back one program. In fact, we took advantage of the fact there was no work, and we built a new library, a new council chambers, new parking structures, and new parks, because we'd set aside for a rainy day, and all the general contractors were underbidding each other just to get our work. We saved our taxpayers $16 million in that process, and we have all these new community assets. So I think if people are looking for just a centrist, many ways, I think Zev was a centrist. I don't agree with everything Zev did or said, but just a centrist, common sense, practical, middle-of-the-road guy for their supervisor. I'm that guy.
Thank you very much. And thank you for watching today, this evening. We hope that you find the discussion that we've had today enlightening. We want you to vote. So please make sure you vote. And we thank Councilman Duran for being here today. Thank you for being at home.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.